Well, hello, podcast listeners. Welcome back. I just wanted to hop on here real quickly before I welcome my next guest, as this next episode is going to come to you in a two-part series. I had my Zoom call with Daniel and realized that we covered so much that this interview had to be split up into two. So in our first episode, which is about to play now, we will talk about PTSD. And the episode we will play next week will be delving deeper into Daniel's story. You'll definitely hear glimpses of his story throughout this episode, but his story is one that just blows me away every time I hear it. And I truly feel that you guys will find value in it as well. So I'm going to stop blabbering here and just get into it. Sit back, relax, and enjoy. Hello and welcome to the Rewrite Your Story podcast. If you are someone who is looking to take power back into your life and be in control of your destiny, then this is for you. This podcast was created to empower others by sharing the tools that have truly transformed my life. So sit back, relax, and let's start rewriting your story today. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Rewrite Your Story podcast. This episode is episode 6. Can you believe it? I can't believe how quickly these weeks are flying in. Thank you all so much who've been listening for the start, and welcome to the new listeners. And for anybody who has joined us on YouTube, you can see that I have another guest this week. We're switching it up this week, taking a step away from the ladies, and I am introducing a really, really wonderful gentleman for you all to meet. His name is Daniel. I could chat about this guy forever, so I'm gonna let him hop on here and do a little intro into who he is. So for Daniel, for people out there that don't know who you are and what you do for your profession, could you give them a little insight into who you are and what you do?
Yeah, so hello, I'm Daniel, and I'm a social worker here in Bristol, and I've been a social worker now for about 2.5 years. And in my studying to become a social worker, I was on placements working with people who were homeless and people who had drug and alcohol problems as well. And that's kind of feeding into some of my work at the moment too. And on the side, I play a bit of music, which is how me and Amy know each other. So, yeah.
Yeah. You listeners might find that a lot of the people I'll bring onto the show I have crossed paths with in some sort of creative aspect in my life.
Yeah.
We met 9 years ago.
Nearly 10 years now.
Oh, yeah. September will be 10 years. Holy shit.
Yeah.
How have you put up with me for that long? In fairness, how have I put up with you for that long?
Also fair. Yeah, mm-hmm. I think we've. Yeah, I can see that. I can see that. Yeah.
For anybody that knows me, I kind of refer to Daniel as like my brother from another mother. Like, he's the brother I never had. Although my father and his father are not the same people, so brother from another mother is true. But we've no blood relation between us. But when we first met, I think it was like the uni. Everyone had just moved into halls. And for people that don't understand what I'm saying when I say uni, I know you American people call it college, but people from our side of the world, we call it university. Daniel and I met, I think I was trying to start a party somewhere, and in an apartment that wasn't even my apartment.
That's right.
They needed like louder music, and I was like, who has speakers? I need speakers. And Daniel was just like, I do. And I'm like, okay, let's go. Never met the dude, didn't know anything about him, but I'm like, let's go get your speakers. And he showed me a 6-pack, which we might unpack later. It's not what it sounds like. Sounds like.
No.
But yeah, we clicked instantly, and then we just kind of bonded. We bonded over like our health issues and like trauma stories, and then music was kind of, I guess, therapy for both of us, and it's something that we both love. Hugely. And it's just something we really connected on. We ended up performing, being in a band together, releasing an EP, writing songs. This guy has been a huge part of my life, and
it's what I mentioned in my other episodes. The guests that I bring on for you guys, yes, of course, they're great people and what they do, but they're people who've really impacted my life and my story and my journey. And the fact that they've impacted me in such a positive way, I would be an idiot if I didn't share them with you too. If they've worked, the relationship I have with them has worked for me. The relationship you could have with these people could work for you too. And my job here is to just educate you guys and pass on the knowledge that has helped me. So of course, I need to introduce you to these amazing, wonderful people.
Yeah.
Now, Daniel and I had a call the other week, and we just kind of were talking about ideas of what to cover and what topics we thought would be really fitting, and kind of based on how we connected and the job he's now doing. A key thing that came up, along with questions that listeners had for me, was the question or topic of PTSD, and that's post-traumatic stress disorder, for people that don't know what that is. And I'm definitely someone who has suffered from it in the past. I went through a lot of therapy to get me to where I am now. And I know I talk about trigger work in a few episodes ago. And just PTSD is just kind of delving into that topic a bit more. So Daniel, from your professional experience, from your training, how would you explain PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder to people that don't really know what it is or aren't familiar with it?
I suppose, to be honest, the name itself sort of is quite self-explanatory. It's someone who has gone through something extremely traumatic, whether that be, it can be a whole host of things. It doesn't. I think a lot of people associate it with being in the army. I think that's sort of where it started out, but it can happen in any walks of life. They're even talking about even this pandemic right now. People could suffer from PTSD in the future because of how much it affects you. And it's just, I think it's something that affects you almost out of nowhere. That sort of seems to be like the early warning signs, is that, as you said, triggers. You just get these triggers that can come out of nowhere. So basically, with PTSD, it's about the traumatic experience that you have gone through. And later on in life, you can have triggers that can bring you back to that traumatic moment. And these triggers can be through hearing something, smelling something. Smelling something was actually a big one for me personally.
Me too.
Yeah, it's crazy. I remember smelling something that smelled like a hospital, and I was right back there, and I was gone. And and that kind of, it's the stuff that's bubbling in your unconscious brain that just goes directly to your conscious brain without any filter. It just goes straight there, and that's what PTSD is. And it takes a long time, as I'm sure you're very well aware, Amy, that it takes a long time to work through, but it's something that you manage. You never fully away from it. You have to develop almost a positive relationship to it to try and understand it and why. Obviously, we've had very different experiences in terms of our PTSD, and each person has their own unique PTSD experience. That's the best way I can try and describe it. But it's a huge, big issue that it's something that isn't recognized in our society and it's not recognized that different things can cause PTSD.
And thanks for that nice explanation, Daniel. When you are talking with your do we call them patients, clients? What's the right word?
Clients/service users, I would usually.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Because like I said to you guys at the beginning of all this, I'm going to bring the professionals on to do the talking because I haven't a clue what I'm talking about. So see, I don't even use the right terminology, but that's okay. So when it comes to your service users, Daniel, when they're coming to your meetings and your sessions with them, do a lot of them know that they have PTSD, or is this something that you talk about and then you realize, like when you unpack things with them, you're like, oh, so that's a trigger for this? Like, do you help them put the two together, or does some kind of come in? Like, when does that kind of light bulb moment of, oh, this is PTSD?
I think.
Sorry,
I think sometimes you're all right. You're all right. Yeah, that's a really good question. I think in my experience with working, with various different service users with various different addictions, reason why they are addicted to what they're addicted to, or just various areas of trauma and
Yeah.
PTSD. Sometimes you're absolutely right. It doesn't scream at you when you meet the person. Sometimes it does because they could be in the middle of it and that's the first thing they tell you.
Mm-hmm.
Or it could take a bit of unpacking. I find that we have a technique, certainly that I used a lot whenever I was working with drug and alcohol service users, was a technique called motivational interviewing, where the worst thing I could do uh, as a support worker would be to go, that sounds a bit like PTSD. That's the worst. They have to find it out for themselves. So
Yeah.
the best way I can do is go, okay, well, you're drinking for what is the reason for you that you're drinking, and try and get them to talk about that, and try and get them to think back as to when the first drink was and see what the connotations were with all of that. And it's just trying to get them to see it for themselves, because then it's a much more healthy relationship that they
Yeah.
develop with, because diagnosis can be an extremely scary thing. It can
Yeah.
be, being labeled with things can be extremely scary. With service users, it's, as I said, really important to get them to develop their own relationship with PTSD.
Yeah.
As I said, the worst thing is for me to say, you have it. They've got to develop it themselves, see that they have it for themselves. No one told me I had PTSD. I found it out myself. It was something that I researched myself. Sometimes you need to talk to someone who then goes, oh, okay, let's talk about that very bad thing that happened in your life. Let's talk about it. And then you start saying, oh, that bad thing keep popping up at these random times. Why is that doing that? And this is how I'm dealing with it. And we have some healthy coping mechanisms to deal with it, and we also have some unhealthy, and it's trying to get the service user to recognize that.
Yeah. And when you say bad thing that happened in your life, could this be like a moment? Could this also be like a certain behavior, like a ritual, like you say about like
Yeah,
substance abuse? Like
yeah,
I imagine even some people that like I've talked about it briefly in some of my other episodes. Like I starved myself, I didn't eat. Like that's
yeah,
technically me abusing myself, and that's an
yeah,
issue. Like people who work too hard and don't sleep enough, that's again,
yeah.
it stems from somewhere, and you're abusing your body. So don't, when you think about these things, don't necessarily think that it has to be a huge traumatic
No, that
experience. There's this can come in so many different forms and so many different ways.
absolutely.
I mean, when I mentioned triggers, and I mentioned it so briefly, it was something it was a footnote
Yeah,
in an episode a few
yeah.
episodes ago, and so many people reach out to me that were like, I had a
Mm-hmm,
light bulb moment. I have the same thing. I have triggers. And then other
mm-hmm,
people messaged me to say that they were just about to go into talking about triggers with their therapist, but they were
yeah.
really nervous about opening that can of worms. But because I mentioned
Mm-hmm,
it, they all of a sudden were feeling lighter and more confident and ready for it.
yeah,
So for the listener that's on the other
yeah.
end here who thinks, do I have PTSD? I don't know. Maybe I do, maybe I don't. What kind of things would you recommend them to do or try, or questions that you would ask them? Say you were in a room with them right now, one-on-one. What kinds
Mm-hmm.
of things would you ask them to help them realize if they're there or not?
Um, I think particularly, I think triggers is a huge thing. I think, and I'm not overly surprised that it probably hit with a lot of people. And I think one of the first things I would do is almost ask them to describe the trigger. What is it that, what was it that set off the trigger? What was it that, where were you when you
Yeah.
felt maybe
Um,
sweaty palms, your heart was racing, all of that?
when we talk about triggers, we mean anything that in your surroundings that emotes emotional or physical response.
Yeah,
As Daniel said,
100%.
it could be, you could just be walking down the street and someone passes you in a blue hoodie, and next minute your
Mm-hmm.
heart's racing and your hands are really,
Yeah,
really sweaty.
yeah,
Like it's noticing that your body is having a different response. without something crazy happening around you. You know, I understand if my heart beats really, really fast and I get sweaty if I'm running a race, or if I've been scared, or if something has made that happen. That's a natural response. So when we talk about triggers, we mean that these are things that happen in an unlikely situation. You could be just watching TV, and next minute you're a lot more tense and you're very aware of your surroundings. So that's kind of what we mean by triggers. Those who are listening that may hear the word but can't really put it together, that's what we're talking about.
It's about recognizing them. I think one of my big ones, I ended up working in a hospital. So for those who don't know, I've had a kidney transplant. I've
you didn't just have, I was going to say, you didn't just have a kidney transplant, Daniel. You've had two. Yeah.
So, and then literally 6 months later, after my second one, I started a job as a hospital social worker. And I thought I'd be fine. I thought I'd be absolutely fine. But, you know, but my trigger was the beep that they have for your intravenous strips when the doctor needs to change it, because we had a repair service for the intravenous strips 2 doors up from our office.
Wow.
So I would be just going to the cafe, and all I'd hear is that beep, and I'm right back in the room where I was. And you've almost got to it's trying to stop yourself in the moment when it's happening and go, okay, this is what it is. And there's almost a level of acceptance.
Yeah.
A huge level of acceptance. There's a huge level of just trying to understand why it's happening, and trying to make the link. Okay, this is from the intravenous strip. I know that that's what it is. And I know that I'm being brought back to a time in my life that I wouldn't really want to do again. And that's, and it's developing that relationship with it almost. Obviously my experience, and also I suppose, my personal life experience is very much hospital rooted, but I understand that, as we've said before, that it can happen in a variety of ways and for a variety of reasons. And a lot of my service users, it could be them seeing their parents, being domestically abusive to each other. Yep. It could be, and they've had to learn coping mechanisms by themselves. And if it's happened from a young age and you've developed these coping mechanisms, they're deeply rooted. And sometimes, you've described it so well in your previous podcast, is these things can rear their ugly head so much later in life. And I think that's what people sometimes think is, oh, well, it happened to me when I was 4 or 5. Why am I thinking about it now in my late 20s, early 30s, even 40s? But brains are a little bit messed up that way. And particularly if it's so deeply rooted, it can just hit you at any time. And sometimes there are triggers that you think you've got a handle on all the triggers, and you might find a new one. And it's almost cognitive behavioral therapy, but I don't want to use that too much, because you've got to develop your own relationship with it.
Some people refer to this kind of therapy as CBT. If you've heard of CBT, it's the same thing.
Yes, and that's really where that is stemming from, is trying not to make you look at the past. It's trying to go, okay, what triggers are giving you symptoms of this adrenaline or panic attack, or you want to escape. How do you calm yourself down in the moment to remind yourself that you're not under attack, you are safe? It's about finding and developing healthy coping mechanisms for this.
Like I mentioned at the very start when I did these podcasts, a lot of these tips and tricks sound so simple. You already have them within you. And like, you could be listening to what Daniel's saying and you're like, light bulb moment. Oh yeah, that's when I feel this way, and that's when I feel this way, and that makes so much sense. It's something that your therapist won't necessarily be able to answer for you either. Like you need to make that link, but they will definitely help you get there to that link. And like Daniel said, it's your subconscious. It's deep in there. So a lot of time you go through these things and you don't even know. Like there's people I've met in my walks of life that who've been really angry, and they have anger issues, and people would just be like, oh, you're an asshole, that person's such a dick. And I'm like, well, maybe that comes from somewhere. Maybe something. And like, once they unpack that and they start doing the work, it's as soon as you start to feel that anger or feel that panic, you
Yeah.
yourself almost have to have like an inner dialogue with yourself, and you're
You
like,
do.
oh wait,
Absolutely.
that's that
Yeah.
feeling again. It does this
Yep.
fit my current surroundings? Yes or no? No.
Yep.
Okay, then don't react. Like, chill out for a second. This is like, and
Mm-hmm.
you kind of, through therapy and through your own
Mm-hmm.
internal work, you kind of can
Mm-hmm.
learn to diffuse those bombs. I guess you become your own bomb
Absolutely.
diffuser specialist. I don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
Like Daniel said as well, like it's your body almost feel like it's under attack. And you kind of go into fight, flight, freeze. You know, some people
Yeah.
will fight and their instant
Mm-hmm.
reaction is to get angry and to, you know, have this big physical response. Other people, it's
Yep.
the flight reaction where they just want to run and get the hell out of there. I know for
Mm-hmm.
me, my typical reaction to any of my triggers was to completely freeze. I was
Yeah.
just,
I'm the same.
I would shut
Yeah.
down. Everything was shut down,
Yeah.
and I couldn't make sentences. I'd be like a deer
Mm-hmm.
caught in headlights. Anybody who's
Yep.
looking at the YouTube version of this, I'm like,
Yeah.
you in the face, you know. But it's just becoming aware of that. And like Daniel
Mm-hmm.
said, you know, it's that takes a bit of time, and don't be hard on yourself. You know, the
Yeah.
first
Oh,
time you
definitely.
become aware of your triggers, it's a case of you may be in that situation, and then you react, and then you realize, oh, but I knew
Mm-hmm.
that was a trigger. Why did I let that happen? The fact that you even knew it was a
Mm-hmm.
trigger, that's the first step. It's like when you look at things like
100%.
Alcoholic Anonymous and drug abuse meetings, you know, the first step is acknowledging it. The first step
Yep.
is admitting this is what this is, but I'm going
Mm-hmm.
to try to work on this. This is not
Yep.
something that's going to be fixed overnight. This is something that's
Mm-hmm.
continuous work. And like Daniel said, you may feel like you've got a handle on one trigger, and then before you know it, boom, there's another one. You know,
Yeah.
this happens. This work on yourself, this self-development is a continuous path. It's not
100%.
something that it's a story that you rewrite and then your book's over. You've got
Mm-hmm.
the follow-up, you've got the sequel, you've got the stories that
Yeah.
come off that story. And
Yeah.
you know, Daniel mentioned a few times briefly, like he's just passed it like it was nothing. But the guy had mentioned that he had 2 different transplants. One when you were just pretty much born, and then the
3.
other,
Yeah.
and then the other just a couple of years ago. So like
Mm-hmm.
to have a transplant as a kid is daunting and scary, but to then know that this organ that you had is now starting to deteriorate and you have to go through this all over again as an adult, it's
Yep.
terrifying.
Yep.
And the guy, he downplays it. He's like, oh yeah, so I've just had 2 transplants, no biggie. But he's been an inspiration for me. You know, I even remember calling Daniel when I was living in Melbourne at the time.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Just
Yep. Yep.
your second transplant, and I was a blubbery mess. I was panicking. I wanted to make sure he was okay. Like, he was the calm one. I was the one that was freaking out and crying.
Yeah.
And like, I remember the next day I couldn't, like, knowing that your operation was happening, and like, oh, I was panicking about you, but then also panicking about your dad.
Mm-hmm.
I guess we haven't mentioned, but it was actually his father that donated the
Yep.
organ the second time around, which is huge. So not only is
Oh,
this something
crazy.
for you, but this is like your whole
Mm-hmm.
family circle. This is like
Yeah.
insane. So this is a huge influential moment in your life for you, but
Oh,
also for me as
100%.
someone who just works with you and appreciates you and just does life with you, to kind of see my friend go through something like this, but be so relaxed and chill. And like, you were back gigging like not too long afterwards. I remember I think it was a year later, I posted a picture of you,
Yeah.
surgery, and then you gigging and you're like, yeah.
That's right.
And I might even link that somewhere here if I can.
Yeah. Oh,
so
it
you
was
guys,
yeah.
I'll put for those who are watching on YouTube, I'll put the image here.
Yeah.
Hopefully it appears. I haven't figured out how to do that yet, but I'll learn for this episode.
It'll be fine.
But yeah, it was amazing. And you went through this second transplant during your education to become into this field. So that's huge. Like, what, and I guess I'm kind of in a way rambling around answering this, so I'm just going to shut up and let you answer it. Like, shaming. You have guests on for a reason. Don't answer their questions. So Daniel, a roundabout way of what I'm trying to ask you is, so why social work? What was that catalyst for you? What was that turning point that made you think, I need to do this? Not a want, but a need to do this.
Actually, there was a moment before I even did the music degree where I was asked by my consultant at the time to go in and speak with a family who had just heard the news that their son was going to need a kidney transplant. So I had no prep, nothing. I was just, my doctor said, "You've been through this, go and help." And I said, "Okay." So I just sat down with him for about half an hour and we chatted about, well, how he's going to feel, how I'm still able to do quote normal stuff and live a normal life and all the things that when you're just in complete shock and you think the world's in meltdown when you hear all these big long names or diseases and think everything's at its
Yeah.
end. It's trying to go, yep, it's going to be a bit difficult getting there and the wait may be quite long and all of that, but it's trying to tell them that it is going to get better, and when the transplant happens, it's going to be brilliant. And my parents will say all day long the change in me, even from 3 before I had it, and then had it, I lived a very normal life. Apart from taking medicines in the morning and at
You're
night,
normal?
well, this
You?
is it.
You're
Yeah.
normal?
No, no, yeah.
I'm joking. I'm joking.
But yeah, so that really was such a huge turning point, um, and then I remember when we were doing music, and you have all the career people coming in, and they're going, right, what do you want to do? And you're thinking, God, there's meant to be a job at the end of this, or we're meant to be doing something. And I said, I got nothing with music, and I love gigging and stuff, but it just wasn't driving me as much.
Yeah.
And I said, I want to help people. And funny enough, I wanted to be a hospital social worker from the get go. That was absolutely all I wanted to be.
Which
And
is crazy because like hospitals,
yeah,
like you mentioned, are like the trigger for your PTSD and like,
yeah,
but I guess for you, maybe even subconsciously, you know that that's a really horrible, scary place to be. Like your
hmm,
doctor had said, but you've gone through this. And for you to
yeah,
chat to that family, for that to be like, it's almost like the opposite of a trigger. That moment of you with that
yeah,
family has been something that's
absolutely.
fueled you to keep going and fueled you to kind of end up doing what you're doing now. And
Yeah,
it was kind of like the first exposure you had to something like that. And
100%.
if you do something that you love, if you do something that's part of something more that impacts other people's lives, you'll
Yeah,
find such that energy shift within yourself. Like
you
I
do.
you just feel
100%.
on fire when you're doing what you're doing. It may be tough. Don't get me wrong. Some days
Yeah.
are not easy, especially in your line of work, Daniel. There's going to be stories that you hear that just break your heart, that are
Oh,
hard to
definitely.
listen to. But
Yeah,
at the end of the day, you're helping someone. Like
you are, and
it's
that's so important. And I, for the past, how long have I been doing this now? Well, social work 2.5 years, as I said, and was doing placements before then. And there are days, you're absolutely right, we just come back here, so I'm just shattered. Goodness, this is worth doing. But there's other days where, and even like today, I was working today, and I had 2 moments today where I was like, this is why I do what I do. It's like, and helping people is a great thing for yourself to do, and hopefully in that you help others. And nobody wakes up in the morning and wants to be an addict. Nobody,
yeah.
and it's nobody says I'm going to drink X amount and that's going to be me for the rest of my life. Nobody wakes up that way to start off. It's that gradual. Just I'm starting to feel a bit better. There's a couple of drinks and it's just more and more and more. And
And that's, I know Daniel's talking about like a drug abuse and alcohol abuse, but like we said earlier, this can be anything. You can be someone who's
yeah,
sleep depriving yourself. You could be over exercising. You could be starving
yeah,
yourself. You could also be doing the opposite and fueling your body with really junk, horrible food. And
definitely,
this is
definitely.
all certain ways of abusing your own body. This is all ways
Yep,
of kind of attacking yourself. And
it
this
is.
episode kind of goes hand in hand with the one that I did with Abby regarding imposter syndrome, where
Yeah,
you are attacking yourself or you are fueling your body with these toxic chemicals or toxic
mm,
substances because you feel worthless. You want to
yep,
mask a pain, you want to hide from it, you want to
hmm,
run. It's again that trigger reaction. You feel that, so you fight, flight, freeze. You run from it, you
yeah,
numb it, you hide from
yep,
it. It's
yep,
all one and the same, whether it's alcohol abuse, whether it's sex addiction, whether
hmm,
it's starving yourself or overeating, it's all one and the same. They all have the same, they all come from the same root, they all have the
Yeah.
same manifestation in your body, and they can all be fixed the same sort of way. And like Danielle
Yeah.
said, it's not like you take a pill and you're fixed. This is
Yeah.
a lifestyle change. This is something where you reprogram your brain and you become aware of it. But
Yeah.
you look at someone, you guys who've listened to my series know my story, especially from episode 2. I've turned my life around and I'm a fully functioning, normal human being. Well, I don't like
Yeah.
to say I'm normal. I like to
No.
say
Yeah.
I'm different to the other girls. But but see, with Daniel was someone who, you know, had a very slim chance of survival, even in his younger life, and is now, you know, doing amazing things. You know, if you're watching him on the YouTube, a very handsome lad. You know, he doesn't look like someone who's been battling health issues or anything, and he's given back and changed his life around. And I guess another thing I want to ask Daniel, you guys have kind of heard a bit of his story. You hear that he is, you know, in the profession he's in, he's doing quite well. You know, he's still working during a global pandemic. Well done. You've still got your job.
Certainly
And
fine. Certainly
you're
fine.
giving
Yeah.
and you're giving back, and you're being part of something more to other people's lives.
Yeah.
And like we mentioned, we touched on earlier, that's not necessarily an easy thing to do because it impacts you and your energy. But you're still going, you're still trucking along. So Daniel, what I want to ask you is a question that I seem to ask all my guests that are on the show. But what is one thing that you have or that you do that makes you feel empowered in your life? Be that every day, be that when you're feeling the dip and you just need to get back up there again. What are the things in your life that kind of make you empowered and get you going again?
A new one probably during this pandemic was being kind to myself. That's been a real big one for me. Not going into too much detail, for the first time, and this isn't a badge of honor or trying to get any, I think mental health is extremely important. And the first time ever I've taken time off for mental health. I've had physical ailments and all that, but first time ever I just went, this is all too much. It's just too much. I need time to process it and I need time to just get away. And self-care has empowered me no end to look after myself and recognize I don't need to be going through this. I don't need to be feeling like this. I can actually speak up to my manager and go, this is just too much, and actually get through the day and be nice to myself and be kind. And you know, if we're feeling a bit bad, go out for a walk or get out of the house. Try and, you know, sometimes routine can be good, but also disrupt it a little bit to go out for a walk and have no route. Just go,
Just
go,
go.
or just go. Let your mind at the back of, you know, just work it out, work whatever's bothering you. Because say global pandemic, you're sitting in your own and you're thinking a bit too much or feeling a bit, because you
Just
can
ruminate.
spiral. So you can, yeah, you can just spiral so easily. So self-care is really how I try and empower myself, and being kind to myself is really something that really gets me going.
I
Yeah.
love that. And you mentioned that's kind of new during the pandemic.
Yeah.
When you say self-care, and I know you mentioned like going for walks, is a
Hmm.
big thing for you. Are there any other kinds of things that you find to fit that self-care mold for you that maybe listeners may have not tried and they're like, oh yeah, I'll give that a go? Like what other kind of self-care things have worked for you?
For me, music, definitely. I've started collecting vinyl. I've been one of these people now. So the whole
Little hipster
process
over
of it,
here.
hipster, beer, the whole thing. I'm just going all out hipster. But that's been, you know, just something a bit new that's came out of this was an extra appreciation for music. Was just, you know, it took me a while to get into it. I started off as sort of lockdown as a shielding person. Over here it mightn't happen. Over in Canada, if you're shielding, it means you can't really do much. You can't during
Yeah.
a global pandemic. You're sort of stuck inside. And
Isolation
when this
time.
first, absolutely, and when this first started, I was going, I'm going to record an album. I'm going to do everything. Within 2 weeks, I was shattered. I was done. I didn't want to do any of it. And that's where the being kind to myself came from. And as I gradually was kinder to myself more and more and more, and recognizing It's okay to have triggers. It's okay to be triggered again with the PTSD. Just work through it slowly but surely. I then fell back in love with music. I redeveloped a good new relationship with it. Bought a new guitar. Probably that wasn't the right thing to do, and yeah, and just really enjoyed doing that. So that's been
I
really
love
good for
that.
me.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's huge. That's huge. And like Daniel's said it in such a beautiful way, guys. And I guess I'm going to sum it up a little, but it's
Mhm.
communicating not
Yeah.
only with others but yourself,
Yeah.
reminding yourself that this is
Definitely.
okay and giving yourself that time. It's so
Definitely.
important. And like we mentioned, these are things you already know, but hopefully by
Mhm.
hearing Daniel's story and Daniel's journey with this, it makes you kind of feel a bit more relatable and reminds you to start putting these things into your routine. And Daniel, I guess before I let you go, do you have any last words of wisdom, any words of advice you want to give people who are, struggling with PTSD, or whether they're just kind of struggling during this pandemic, or they're trying to kind of find their feet? Are there any kinds of words of wisdom you'd like to leave them with?
Give yourself time. Just give yourself the time to do what you need to do and work out what works for you. Um, Mental health, as someone who went through physical ailments and physical health stuff, mental health just didn't really hit me till much later on in life. And it really is, it can be as serious as physical health stuff. So it's about being kind and giving yourself the time, as if you had some kind of stomach bug and you give yourself the time to recover from that. Give yourself the time to recover from mental health. You need to do that because you will come back stronger for it.
I
So.
never thought of it like that. Like anybody watching the YouTube version of this will literally have seen my face change. And this is someone
Yeah.
who would say I've done the work. I never
Mm-hmm.
thought of it like that. Like I'll go take a few days off work and rest if I've got a stomach flu,
Yeah.
but I wouldn't
Yeah.
necessarily. Wow, that's
Mm-hmm.
you say it so simply, but it's just like light bulb moment in my head, and maybe
Yeah.
it's been that some of you guys listening have had the same reaction as me. But yeah, that's beautiful. It's a lovely last words of wisdom, and I guess second to that question, Daniel, if there are people listening that feel like
Mm-hmm.
they are struggling with addiction, or
Yeah.
they're in a not so great spiral at the moment and they do want to seek help, what would kind of be your advice on kinds of services that are available that people can reach out to in their local areas?
So depending on, because I know you've got quite wide, varied listenership from different countries, so I'm not
Yeah.
entirely sure, but things in the realm of, your nearest drug and alcohol service can be extremely useful. Sometimes even a GP can be really useful in terms
When
of,
we say
uh,
GP, that we're
ah,
for anyone
yeah,
in the US or Canada, we mean your family doctor.
family doctor can be very useful for that. Um, yeah, drug and alcohol service. Sometimes Alcoholics Anonymous can be sometimes good for people. There's also a thing called SMART meetings. I should know what SMART stands for. I didn't do my homework there. I'm so sorry. If you look it up, SMART meetings, that can be, it's about achievable goals and ways to, smart and achievable goals and ways to help your addiction. Um,
Amazing.
that's what those meetings are about. So hopefully, yeah, those are the places I would try and look for. So hopefully that's
Perfect.
okay for
I love
people.
that, of course. And even for me, when when I wanted to first get help, the two things I did was first I just Googled like abuse
Mm-hmm.
and refuge and charities in
Yeah,
my area. And typically when you
yeah,
type in the word of what you're currently going through and what you're battling, you will find those counselors and specific
yeah,
therapists because
for sure.
don't get me wrong. And I also did go through my doctor, but my doctor could point me in the direction of a generic therapist. But given
Mm-hmm.
what I went through, I wanted to go to someone who was, specifically educated in my area. And similar
Mm-hmm.
with, I guess, Daniel's sector, it's really impactful to go to someone who has that addiction and alcohol abuse sector
Definitely,
there as well. So,
definitely.
if you certainly have a quick Google, look up at some of these places. If you are someone who follows the Rewrite Your Story Instagram page, I do have some numbers on there for support numbers you can ring for the UK, Ireland, and Canada, as well as the US. So certainly feel free to give them a bell if you're not finding anything, as the numbers I put up there are definitely retributable and contactable. Those numbers do work. So feel free to give them a call. But I just thank you all for listening. I thank you all for wanting to do this work, and thank yourself, because this is work that you're doing on yourself, for you, for nobody else. This is so important to just say thanks to you sometimes. So yeah, thanks for listening, but thanks to you for listening.
As mentioned at the start of this episode, Daniel will be back next week. During our interview, we covered so many things, and I couldn't cut the episode and not share this information with you. I know Daniel did talk about his story and his triggers a little during this episode, and next week we will be getting into that in so much more detail. His story is one that truly blows my mind, and I'm sure you will all find inspiration from it as well. I hope you enjoyed listening to this episode, and I cannot wait to share next week's one with you as well. Have a good week. Talk to you soon. Bye. Thank you so much for listening to the Rewrite Your Story podcast. It would truly mean the world to me if you could subscribe and leave a review on whatever streaming platform you listen to this on. Leave a written review, a 5-star review. It truly helps to get this into the ears of those who really need to hear it. If you're not already a member of the Rewrite Your Story community, you can find us at rewriteyourstory.ca on Facebook, Instagram, and our website. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week. Bye.